I paid $7 for a wooden dresser that almost got me killed. Not literally. But when I think back on that Saturday morning, standing in a stranger's driveway, squinting in the early October sun, haggling over a piece of furniture I didn't even need, I had absolutely no idea what I was about to walk into. My name is Nora. I'm a registered nurse, 43 years old, divorced for 6 years, living in a semi-detached on a quiet street in Hamilton, Ontario, with my teenage daughter and a cat named Biscuit who hates everyone except me. My life is not dramatic. I work 12-hour shifts. I grocery shop on Thursdays. I call my mother on Sundays, even when I don't feel like it. I am not the kind of person things happen to, or so I thought. It started the way most unexpected things do, quietly, and on a weekend. My neighbor Margaret had sent me a text Friday night. Estate sale 2 streets over. Starts at 8. Furniture, dishes, old stuff. Thought of you since you mentioned needing a dresser. I hadn't really mentioned needing a dresser. I'd complained once that my bedroom closet was a disaster, which Margaret had apparently filed away. She's like that. She remembers everything you say, which is both a comfort and slightly alarming. I almost didn't go. I had laundry to fold and a half-finished cup of coffee and zero motivation to leave my house before 9 on a Saturday. But the sale was 2 streets away, and I figured worst case I'd be back in 20 minutes with nothing to show for it and a valid excuse not to do laundry. The house belonged to a woman named Eleanor Ashford. I didn't know that at the time. I only learned her name later, and the more I learned about her, the more I understood why everything had unfolded the way it did. What I saw that morning was a modest bungalow in a neighborhood that had been steadily gentrifying for years. Tables set up on the front lawn covered in the accumulated decades of someone's life. Candlestick holders, china that probably hadn't been used in 30 years, a box of Reader's Digest condensed novels from the 1980s. The usual archaeology of a life lived quietly and then cleared out by people in a hurry. There were maybe a dozen people moving around the lawn. A man in his 50s was running things. Clipboard, brisk manner, the air of someone who wanted this over by noon. He introduced himself as the executor and said the family had authorized a full clearance sale. Everything must go. I wandered for a while without much purpose. I looked at a lamp I didn't need. I picked up a cutting board and put it back down. And then I walked around to the side of the house where the larger furniture pieces were leaned against the fence. And that's when I saw it. It was a solid oak dresser, 4 drawers, the kind they don't make anymore. Old, probably from the 1960s or earlier, with that dark honey finish that goes almost amber in the right light. One of the drawer handles was missing, and the surface had a few rings from decades of coffee cups or glasses. But it was sturdy. You could tell just by looking at it. The kind of thing built to outlast everyone who ever owned it. The tag said $25. I offered $15. The executor said $20. I said $17, and he laughed in a tired way and said, "Sure, fine, $17. He helped me carry it to my car, wedged into the back of my SUV at an awkward angle with the trunk held down by a bungee cord. I drove home at 40 kilometers an hour with my 4-way flashers on. My daughter, Paige, helped me drag it up the front steps and into my bedroom. She's 17 and stronger than she looks, and she did this without complaint, which I noted with quiet gratitude. We set it against the wall across from the window, and she stood back, tilted her head, and said, "It's actually really nice." High praise from a 17-year-old. I didn't open the drawers until that evening. I'd been in and out of the room all day, changing out of my estate sale clothes, making lunch, charging my phone on the nightstand, and the dresser just sat there looking like it belonged. After dinner, when Paige had gone upstairs with her headphones and Biscuit had claimed the armchair in the corner, I started putting things away. Folded shirts in the top drawer, sweaters in the second. The third drawer I left for miscellaneous things I hadn't sorted yet. The bottom drawer stuck, not badly, just that slight resistance old wood gets when the humidity shifts. I pulled a little harder, and it came out smoothly, empty, like the others had been. I set a stack of spare bedding inside and pushed it closed, but something felt off. I stood there for a second, frowning at the dresser. I pulled the bottom drawer open again, all the way out this time, set it on the floor, looked at the inside of the frame, and I noticed it, a gap. Not a crack, not a flaw. A deliberate gap between the base of the dresser and where the drawer sat. About 2 inches, running the full width. I pushed on the base panel. Nothing. Pulled at the edge of it. It moved. It lifted out. And underneath it, in a shallow hidden compartment running the full length of the dresser's base, were 2 things. A manila envelope sealed with tape that had gone brittle with age, and a small cloth bag with a drawstring, the kind you get when you buy something expensive from a jewelry store. I sat on the floor. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for Biscuits to come investigate, sniff both items, and lose interest. I picked up the cloth bag first. It was heavier than it looked. I loosened the drawstring and tilted the contents into my palm. A coin, 1 coin, gold-colored, but heavier than any coin I'd ever held. On one side, a maple leaf. On the other, a profile of Queen Elizabeth II, and the words Canada 9999 Fine Gold 1 Ooze, a gold maple leaf coin. My hands were shaking a little when I set it on the floor beside me and picked up the envelope. It took me a moment to get it open. The tape had really bonded to the paper over the years. Inside were several documents. The first was a handwritten letter on cream-colored stationery, the handwriting small and very neat, the kind of penmanship they taught in schools 60 years ago. I read it standing in my bedroom in the lamplight, and by the time I got to the end, I had to sit back down on the floor. If you are reading this, it began, then the dresser has found its way to someone other than my son, which means my plan worked. And I can only hope I guessed right about the kind of person who would end up with it. Her name was Eleanor Ashford. She had lived in that house for 41 years. She had a son named Robert Ashford, who she wrote had been her greatest heartbreak and her most persistent fear for the better part of 2 decades. She didn't go into detail about what Robert had done. She was a private woman. You could feel it in the sentences, in what she chose not to say. But she was clear that he had borrowed money from her repeatedly over the years, had manipulated her, had tried more than once to have her declared mentally incompetent so that he could access her accounts. She had quietly moved her savings. She had consulted a lawyer without Robert's knowledge. She had set things aside carefully and slowly over several years, and then she had arranged things so that Robert would never find what she'd left behind. He will not bid on old furniture at an estate sale, she wrote. He never has and he never will. He thinks anything that isn't new is beneath him. The dresser will be sold for almost nothing, and he won't look twice at it. Whoever buys it will deserve what they find far more than he does. I am sorry I cannot know who you are. I hope you are someone who needed a bit of luck. The documents beneath the letter were an accounting of everything in the compartment. The gold coin was a 1-ounce Canadian gold maple leaf. At the time I looked it up that night, spot gold was sitting at just over 3,000 Canadian dollars per ounce. The coin itself was worth more than I'd spent on groceries in the past 2 months. But that wasn't all. There were also 2 bearer bonds from a Canadian financial institution, old ones, each with a face value that made my eyes go strange when I tried to read them. I had to look up what bearer bonds even were. I'm a nurse, not a financial advisor. Essentially, they function like cash. Whoever holds them can redeem them. Eleanor had listed their combined redemption value in a note clipped to the back, approximately $68,000, though she'd written it might be somewhat more depending on accumulated interest. I sat on my bedroom floor for a long time that night. Paige came down at some point to ask if I wanted tea, saw my face, and sat down next to me without asking questions. That's the thing about your kids. The good ones read the room. I showed her the letter. I watched her face change as she read it. "Mom," she said, and then didn't say anything else for a minute. "Is this real?" "I think so," I said. "I don't know. I think it's real." I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about Eleanor Ashford, about what her life must have been like, living with that kind of fear, not from a stranger, not from something outside her door, but from her own child. I thought about what it takes to plan something like this. To think it through carefully, without panic, to make quiet arrangements over years, to trust the outcome to a stranger she would never meet. There was something almost unbearably sad about it, and something underneath that felt almost like defiance, like she had found a way to win. First thing Monday morning, I called my own lawyer. Her name is Frances Holt, and she has an office downtown on James Street North that always smells like coffee and old paper. I've used her for small things over the years, my divorce, a dispute with a contractor. She's methodical and unimpressed by almost everything, which is exactly what you want in a lawyer. I brought the envelope with all its contents. I brought the gold coin in its cloth bag. I sat across from Frances and told her the whole story, beginning to end. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I like about her. When I finished, she looked at the documents for a long time before she spoke. "Okay," she said. "First question, do you still have the original receipt of sale?" I did. I had the handwritten receipt the executor had given me. $17 for one oak dresser, sold as is. Frances made a copy of it. She explained that bearer bonds in Canada exist in a complicated legal space. The ones Eleanor had were old enough that they predated most of the regulatory changes around such instruments. Frances made some calls over the next few days. She consulted with a colleague who specialized in estate law. The short version of what she came back with was this: the bonds were legitimate. They were redeemable, and because Eleanor had explicitly addressed the contents of the compartment to a finder in her letter, using language that Frances said was unusual, but not without precedent. And because I had purchased the dresser through a legitimate sale conducted by the estate's authorized executor, there was a reasonable legal argument that the contents were mine. "Reasonable," I repeated. "Strong," Frances said, which from her is practically effusive. She also advised me to make no mention of this to anyone, to store the coin and the documents somewhere safe, and to let her work through the proper channels before I did anything else. I went home, locked everything in the small fireproof safe I keep in my bedroom closet, where Paige can't find my passport and important papers, and tried to go back to my normal life. I managed about 8 days. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was at the hospital between patients, eating a protein bar in the break room and watching exactly nothing on my phone when it rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I picked up on the last ring. "Is this Nora?" The voice was male, probably late 40s or early 50s, with the specific flatness of someone who is furious but has decided to sound calm about it. Nora, who bought furniture from my mother's estate. Everything in my chest went still. "Who is this?" I said. "My name is Robert Ashford," he said. "I believe you have something of mine. I want to be clear about what happened in the next 2 minutes, because I've replayed it many times since. I did not panic. I don't entirely know why. Maybe 12 years of nursing had trained my nervous system to stay functional when things go wrong. I told him, very calmly, that I didn't know what he was referring to. He told me, equally calmly, that he had reason to believe certain family items had been included in the estate's sale in error, and that he would like to arrange the return of those items. He used the word error 3 times. He did not specify what the items were. "If you're talking about something from the sale," I said, "you'll need to speak to whoever conducted the sale. I purchased what I purchased legally." There was a pause. "I'd really prefer to handle this privately," he said. "Family matters are always better handled privately, don't you think?" I said I'd have my lawyer follow up. He said that wouldn't be necessary. I said I'd have my lawyer follow up, thanked him for calling, and ended the call. Then I went into the bathroom, locked the stall door, and stood there with my back against the wall for about 90 seconds, breathing slowly, before I washed my hands and went back to work. I called Frances on my lunch break and told her everything. I could almost hear her nodding. "He found out about the sale," she said. "Probably went through the estate accounts and noticed a discrepancy. Or maybe he asked someone who was there. Doesn't matter. He's fishing. He didn't say what he's looking for, which means he's not certain what he's looking for. He said family items included in error. That's not a legal claim. That's a conversation opener." She paused. "I'll write him a letter." Frances's letter, when it went out, was polite and precise and said essentially nothing, which is its own kind of message. It acknowledged that I had purchased the dresser through a legitimate estate sale, confirmed that I had legal documentation of the purchase, and invited any further communications to go through her office. Robert Ashford called me once more, 2 weeks later. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was less calm this time, something about how his mother hadn't been in her right mind in her final years, and that anything she might have left in unusual places would be subject to estate law, and he had every right to pursue this. I forwarded the voicemail to Frances without listening to it twice. Frances had been busy in those 2 weeks. She had located the estate's solicitor, a man named Douglas Mercer, who had handled Eleanor's affairs for the better part of a decade. Mr. Mercer, it turned out, had been aware of Eleanor's intentions in a general sense. He had helped her with some of the financial arrangements. He had not known specifically about the hidden compartment, but he confirmed that Eleanor had been, in his professional assessment, entirely and without question of sound mind. He had documentation. He had dated correspondence. He was, Frances told me, more than willing to make all of this available should the matter proceed to any kind of formal dispute. It didn't. Robert Ashford sent one more communication through an actual lawyer this time, a short letter asserting a claim on the estate's assets. Frances replied with Mr. Mercer's documentation, the receipt of sale, and a copy of Eleanor's letter. I don't know exactly what happened on Robert's end after that, but I never heard from him again. Frances called me on a Tuesday afternoon in November, 4 weeks after that Saturday at the estate sale, and told me the bonds had been validated and could be redeemed through the issuing institution. She walked me through the process. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold while I listened. The total came to just over $71,000. Once interest was calculated, the gold coin I decided to keep for now. I'm not sure why, exactly. Maybe because it was the first thing I touched. Maybe because it makes the whole thing feel real in a way that numbers on a screen don't quite manage. I've thought a lot about Eleanor Ashford in the months since. I've looked her up. She was a retired school teacher, which made something tighten in my chest when I read it. She had worked for 32 years at an elementary school in the East End. She had, as far as I can tell, no other children, no close relatives. She had lived alone in that bungalow since her husband died in 2003. She had been, by all accounts, a quiet and self-contained woman who didn't ask for much and didn't make trouble. I don't know what Robert did to her, not specifically. I don't need to. I know what she wrote, that she had been afraid, that she had planned, that she had trusted a stranger with the outcome of a very long private battle, that she had, in her own careful way, chosen who would benefit from a lifetime of quiet saving. She chose right. I'm not a person who believes things happen for a reason. I've worked in healthcare too long to hold on to that kind of comfort. People get sick randomly. Good people die young. I don't think Eleanor Ashford's dresser was destined to end up in my bedroom any more than I think the tide comes in because the ocean cares. But I do think about that Saturday morning, the text from Margaret that I almost ignored, the estate sale I almost skipped, the dresser I almost didn't notice, wedged against the fence in the side yard. I think about how many times between that morning and this one something could have gone differently. And I think about Eleanor in her bungalow making her quiet arrangements, trusting that whoever came along would be the right kind of person. I hope she was right about me. I'm trying to make sure she was. I put half the money into a registered education savings account for Paige, who doesn't know the full story yet. She knows something happened with the dresser. She knows it turned out to be significant, but she doesn't know the number. I'll tell her when she's ready, which I think means when I'm ready. The rest I've kept in a high-interest savings account that I am, for the first time in 6 years, not anxious about. I had one mortgage payment left before my emergency fund would have been empty. I have options now that I didn't have before. Not extravagant options, not life-changing in a private jet way, but the kind of options that let you breathe a little easier on a Wednesday when the car makes an unfamiliar sound. The dresser is still in my bedroom. I kept it. I thought about whether it would feel strange to have it there, and it doesn't. It feels, if anything, like company. Like something that has its own story and chose, or was chosen, to put part of that story in my hands. Biscuit sleeps on top of it now, which I take as a sign that the energy is good. I drove past Eleanor's house once, about a month ago. It had already been sold. There was a young couple's car in the driveway, a new welcome mat at the front door. A child's bicycle leaned against the porch railing. I sat at the stop sign a little longer than I needed to, and thought about Eleanor choosing that house, moving into it with her husband, building a life there that ended up looking nothing like she'd planned. I hope she would like what the dresser looks like in my room. I hope she would like that it's being used, that it's holding things, that it ended up somewhere ordinary and warm. I hope, wherever she is, she got to watch Robert Ashford open that empty space under the bottom drawer and understand that she had thought of everything, and he had never thought of her at all.